Hello, hello. Thank you for joining in on this discussion on APIs and how they break down barriers to interoperability in healthcare. We're so glad you're here. So before we get started, I want to hit on a few logistical reminders. First, we will be broadcasting this webinar live and recording the session. Anyone who registered for this event, regardless of whether you're here with us live right now or not, will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours. Everyone is muted, but if you have questions, we encourage you to participate by sending them in the chat. While we may or may not get to all the questions within the live webinar, we have experts on the line who will either answer real time or grab your questions so we can follow up with you after. The format we'll follow for the next 45 minutes is a discussion between Damien, Caitlin, and me. We sincerely enjoyed preparing for this webinar and chatting through this topic with our customers day to day. So we hope you get out of it what you expected, and if not, that it at least serves as an introduction to the conversation that we can carry on with you after the webinar. Some of you may be well versed in APIs and using them as a primary way to exchange information and build architectures that support a secure and scalable environment. And some of you may be exploring because you know you need to adopt FHIR soon and interact with REST APIs for regulatory reasons or to comply with national guidelines. Maybe you're onboarding digital apps or business systems that require you to scale up your skill set to know how to work with APIs in your current applications. Or simply you recognize the benefits and efficiencies and aren't there yet. So regardless of why you've come to the webinar, you've come to the right place to learn how Lineate's working with customers regardless of where they are on their journey with API adoption. So it's no secret that API technology has transformed the digital economy and is now poised to do the same in healthcare. So the emergence of standards like APIs and FHIR is moving healthcare IT closer to a plug-and-play approach to interoperability. So within the course of this webinar, we plan to cover and really start with the basics. What are APIs and how do they work? How can APIs solve interoperability barriers? What are the advantages of using APIs compared to traditional integration methods? And then conclude with the potential that we see with API technology in healthcare IT and how Lineate customers across the continuum of care are realizing it. My name is Shelly Waymeyer, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Lineate. I come from a background of global EHR implementation, product management, and product marketing. I love working across product, sales, and marketing teams to enable each function to do what they do best so we can move the meter on connecting care teams across the continuum. I've said it before and I'll say it again, my why for healthcare IT is figuring out how to get clinicians as much time with the patient and coordinating care as efficiently as possible across the care team. Now I'll turn it over to my co-presenters to introduce themselves. Caitlin, why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Formal. I'm a solution consultant at Lineate. I've worked in healthcare IT for my entire career and began a specific focus on interoperability in 2013. I started on the implementation side before transitioning to an architect and sales engineering role. So I understand the challenges that our customers face with data integration. So I guess my why is adding as much efficiency as possible across the healthcare data ecosystem.
Thank you, Caitlin. All right, Damien.
Thanks. Hello, my name is Damien Leppert, and I'm currently the VP of Growth and Innovation here at Lineate. I have a very diverse background. I actually started out in healthcare administration consulting over 20 years ago and quickly transitioned into technology. And I've seen and helped connect systems in a number of different industries. And I came back to healthcare in 2005 in a startup really about doing community care management. And while I was there, we had a need for integration, and I purchased Rhapsody. So I was a customer first. And so I got firsthand knowledge about how it was to work with it. And in 2011, I joined the team, and I've been along for the ride ever since, really working with our customers and partners, as well as our internal development and innovation teams to kind of push the edges of what we can do, what can be possible in terms of connecting the various systems across the healthcare ecosystem, really in a similar vein to what Shelley said about making it easier, so removing all of the barriers for the delivery of care.
Awesome. I'm so glad to be here with you both. Thank you for your time. And so like I said, we're starting with the basics. And Caitlin, I've heard you give an awesome explanation before of what an API is. So how about you break it down for everyone?
Sure, thanks, Shelley. I hope this is we'll cover it for everyone. Again, this might be a higher level for some, but we just definitely want to set the stage. So, API or an application programming interface, it simply defines how two systems are going to communicate and exchange data with one another. It's going to define what information I need to send to an application, or an application needs to send to an application to get what I need, how I authenticate and authorize myself, and rules around what I'm allowed to do. So am I allowed to delete certain things? What am I allowed to update? APIs are typically sent over a SOAP or REST-based protocol using an XML or a JSON payload. And Damien will touch more on those specifics later, but anyone that uses a web browser or a smartphone has interacted with APIs. It's like what you see on the screen here. I just kind of wanted to come up with some examples of what you would have interacted with. So this first one, I order things online. I think e-commerce has become more prevalent, so I think probably most of us have. So when I get an email that when you make your order, you get an email confirmation, and it's going to send you some information on when you're going to receive your order. In this case, I ordered something from a store called Sephora that some of you may know, some of you may not. And it's told me when it was going to be delivered. It's actually calling an external API to display this information within the email that they're sending me. And this is actually telling me what date it's going to arrive. This store does not have its own shipping tracking information. It's calling externally to FedEx or maybe UPS, depending on what region you live in. In this case, it was FedEx. And so it's just a way that we can call the data. I can send it what I need, probably a tracking number, an order number that's dealt with FedEx to get on. Another example is Uber calling Google Maps API. I'm sure everyone takes Uber or has in their life. When I'm trying to say where I need to go from point A to point B, Uber actually utilizes Google Maps API to send you your receipt, which you're actually seeing here in my email, and actually do some of the mapping for their drivers. Another one I like to say is, any web page that you visited that had a video, especially a video that was probably hosted on YouTube, it might be hosted on YouTube, they might not have their own video hosting platform. And this was actually an online course that I took, and they did not have their own video hosting platform service, and so they were able to call YouTube's API to get the information that they need, pull it down so you can see the video embedded within their web page. So APIs allow us to exchange data between applications and just use what we need. You don't need to know everything about how those interactions occur. We just need to know, what do I need to send? What do I want to receive? And we kind of almost make a agreement together on what we want to talk about.
Awesome. That makes it so clear to me. It's much simpler approach than I think some of what are the legacy health integration standards we've used before. So Damien, I'd like to tap on you next to go a little bit further into what this all means in the context of healthcare and legacy integration standards.
Sure. Next slide. So this diagram really is meant to represent kind of the evolution. So I'll take a step back in time a little bit on the far left-hand side here. And this is true in healthcare, but it's true in all industries. Before things like APIs were standardized, everything needed to go point to point, and so it was very tightly coupled. You would write an interface that went directly from one system to another system, and as the number of systems that needed to communicate became more and more, you can imagine what that started to look like. It would be a bit of a spaghetti ball, and it was relatively brittle. And you had to implement all of the routing and interactions from a specific system to a specific system over and over every time you wanted to add one. And then kind of we moved into a more hub and spoke type of architecture, where you only had to write from a particular system one time into an integration engine, like Rhapsody or CorePoint. And then from there, it could distribute it to everywhere that it needed to go. It could also aggregate the returns back into your EMR, for example, coming through a single point. And that was great for a while, but when you started to want to have reusable services, as there were more people that you needed to exchange data with, the service-oriented architecture started to come into healthcare. And really, it was only a few years after it started to take hold in the other industries that are out there. And so the service-oriented architecture is really about creating a common service that you can call with a specific set of logic that is reusable, and you can use it for multiple systems. So sometimes inside of the four walls of a facility, you might be reaching out to just certain services that you always want to send your demographic information in a particular way. Well, as more and more systems needed to be able to identify a patient more accurately, you could introduce systems like EMPI or terminology services, and those expose an API or application programming interface. Initially, a lot of them were based around SOAP, and SOAP is an XML-based protocol that sits on top of HTTP and uses XML. And it's relatively prevalent even today. I'll talk about it a little bit later in one of our examples, but that carried a lot of overhead with it. And so we started to see that RESTful HTTP-based APIs became much easier to implement and lighter weight. They used just the standard HTTP protocol, as well as lighter weight data formats like JSON. And we're seeing that in healthcare in FHIR, but there are also a number of custom APIs that are around JSON and REST as well. So you get to build it once and reuse that service over and over. And you can, those services are exposed through those SOAP or REST endpoints.
Awesome,
Hopefully
thank you.
Making sense.
It does, and we'll take a look here at the chat too before we wrap up and see if anyone has questions on your explanation there. And one thing I noticed as you're describing that, it might be a good time to talk too about how the technology leverage within APIs is quite transferable. So instead of it being a healthcare specific standard or leveraging healthcare specific protocols, we see some benefits, and perhaps that's one of the drivers in the acceleration of adoption of APIs is that there's a broader set of users out there or engineers out there who are familiar with these pieces of technology. Gives us a wider pool of talent to work with. Caitlin, do you want to talk a little bit about why the push for APIs and what's accelerating API adoption from a technology standpoint?
Sure. I think a big piece is what both you and Damien touched on is that both working with JSON and XML, which are also self-describing payloads. And so both of them say, hey, this is the patient identifier, and this is what it is. Whereas in HL7, those of us that know it well, that we know that identifier is in PID3. So it's just a more adaptable skill set to not just users that are, just more engineers are going to have familiarity with these types of payloads and these types of interactions. I don't know if Damien, if you wanted to add to that too.
Yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of that service-oriented architecture and APIs in general is about that intersection of the technology and usability. So a lot of the payloads that cross those APIs are now self-descriptive, and your example is a perfect one. So here's the patient identifier, here's a name, et cetera. And so it allows the machine-to-machine communication to be easier, but those people working on those machines have the ability to also read that information relatively easily as well.
Awesome. Well put. And so we've talked a bit about some of the technology drivers that are accelerating API adoption. And a personal area of interest for me is looking at some of the market drivers for adoption. One that I have familiarity with is from a regulatory or overall just national guidelines standpoint. So it was often in my past life a national guideline or regulation at some level that was encouraging providers to become versed in APIs either for themselves so that they could work with it or so that they could work with their HCIT vendors to comply with standardized data exchange guidelines coming from some level. So one example that I'm familiar with was in the UK when NHS Digital has released and continues to release a set of Firebase APIs to be used as a standard for specific initiatives, like generation of standardized transfer of care documents. Damien, do you want to speak to other market drivers, both regulatory and otherwise, that are accelerating the need for API adoption?
Absolutely. As Caitlin mentioned when she was introducing the topic, APIs are an easy way to get access or to share data from one organization to another organization. And so a lot of the drivers around being able to have access to things like information from people's Apple Watches or Garmin smartwatches or smartphones or smart scales really brings that to bear because you need to be able to call out to the APIs of the platform that's collecting that data in order to pull it into the systems and make it available to the users within the hospital or within the payer or within the HCIT vendor space.
Awesome. Thank you, Damien. So far we've talked about the basics. What is an API? We've talked about the benefits of APIs over traditional or legacy healthcare integration standards. We've talked about what's driving API adoption through technology and through regulation. And now let's pivot the conversation a little bit and get a little bit more specific to Lineate and how Lineate meets customers where they are with technology and services to support working with APIs. So to start, we wanted to first take a look at specifically what CorePoint and Rhapsody do in working with APIs and how our customers are using the API capabilities within the integration engines. Would you like to give a quick overview, Caitlin?
Sure. Yeah. So if I hop into that, I think there was a question about like what a payload is, and we probably should have specified that earlier. So a payload is just what data are we exchanging? Is it JSON? Is it an XML? Is it HL7? Is it a CSV file? Is it a PDF? It is all of those different things. So I just want to touch on that first. But like you said, both of our engines have the capability to do all of those payloads and of course custom payloads as necessary. And so our engines are going to allow us to do things, like we can both host or connect out to a SOAP or a REST-based web service. As Damien spoke to earlier, SOAP is still there in healthcare because it was one of the first ones. So we do see that a lot, especially for document exchange in different registries and across the ecosystem. But since REST is more lightweight, I see most of our newer APIs are going to be implemented over REST, and our engines can support that. And of course, as FHIR has become more prevalent in the ecosystem, we want to make sure that we can support all of those payloads. And since those are XML and JSON, they're both native to our engines. Additionally, we can also do those different things like all the things that need to support those types of integrations. Make sure that we can authenticate via whether that's a TLS connection or an OAuth type authentication. And I think probably the thing I like to emphasize the most is our tools allow you to, yes, healthcare, there is a migration toward REST APIs, but there are still going to be systems that you need to communicate with that might still be operating and we need to contact a SQL database, or we do need to have HL7. And so we have tools to do those different transformations to make sure that those types of more complex orchestrations can be achieved. So both CorePoint and Rhapsody have those capabilities.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. And I think maybe to break it down even further, let's look at a couple customer use cases. So I think we've got a couple use cases teed up where in these cases, the customer was leveraging Lineate CorePoint, but the use cases apply to both of Lineate's integration engines.
Yeah, so this particular use case here is this specialty treatment center for a specialty illness is using Lineate CorePoint. And they need to consume different data elements, and they need to, most of them HL7v2, but also some messaging between customers. But they need that actually to be posted to their Salesforce customer relationship management system. And within that external trading partner side here that you can see on the right, there are going to be different APIs that need to be called. This particular implementation is done over SOAP, but of course, this could be done over REST. Salesforce does introduce both SOAP and REST-based APIs, but this implementation happened to be configured about 7 years ago. And we were able to consume both HL7v2 and those XDR direct secure messaging within our CorePoint engine, and then call the relevant SOAP APIs to do the relevant updates and vice versa and back and forth. And so it's sometimes as healthcare has evolved, our ecosystem has become not just healthcare applications. There's going to be a lot of the Salesforce does healthcare. We're going to need to integrate with people that maybe they don't speak HL7 and they don't speak that. So I like this example a lot.
Awesome, thank you.
One thing there, when you say, Salesforce, but then there are others out there as well. I remember one implementation where we had to interact with not only Workday, so the staffing and also Chronos, so the timekeeping applications via those APIs and interact between the EMR systems and the payment systems, as well as those administration and back office capabilities.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, so it's an additional example. This is also going through a CorePoint engine, is where we needed to integrate an AI type application that needed to consume data from multiple applications within a academic medical center, and those applications were not necessarily APIs, so there was no way for them to interact directly. There were some that were very specific to clinical trials, so we needed to actually execute a SQL query, so we can do database connections to make that and feed that data back to that AI platform, so we can do all of the stuff that it needs to do. Additionally, it could be REST APIs that we have on both ends. And that's also a very common use case for things like how I'm managing appointments and different referral partners. Also, there might be different documents and PDFs that the AI platform needed to parse out. And so we were able to host that REST API endpoint within CorePoint. And so they could make the queries they needed. We used the technology within the product to actually do that orchestration, say where it needed to go, make the appropriate queries, and feed that data back so that that application could be completely enabled.
Awesome. I've seen this same architecture too on the inverse, where looking at this diagram, where the external trading partner maybe is our customer, an HCIT vendor, a digital health app, and they're using Lineate Rhapsody or Envoy to get information from a variety of EMRs or a variety of providers that they connect with to then ingest and feed into their proprietary REST API for whatever magic they're doing with it on their end.
Yeah, it's actually a very common use case, probably one we see more and more.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, and moving right along. So, pivoting a little bit from the way we looked at those specific use cases, didn't mean to advance it there, but we'll go back one and wanted to talk with you, Damien, about an architecture you've been working on for one of our State Department of Health customers and how they're using APIs to solve for some identity management use cases in partnership with Lineate.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was an interesting one, and you talked about drivers before. I've seen a lot of pressure to modernize, in particular, our public health infrastructure, in particular as a response to the recent pandemic and being prepared in case there is another one coming. And in this particular case, at a large state Department of Health, we were able to go in and we had a combination of Rhapsody already deployed within the department, and then we hosted an Envoy instance in front of that for specific types of interactions. And when we first implemented that, we were exposing SOAP-based web services out to the providers and laboratories and testing or immunization sites, so for mass vaccinations. And we had to be able to pull in information from that master of the mass vax implementation. So we're pulling in data from Salesforce, pulling that over RESTful APIs, and getting data from the providers, from the laboratories, and from large pharmaceutical chains like CVS that would also do immunizations, and updating that immunization registry in the background. And one of the things that really highlighted for the department was that they had a number of these systems that you see across the top. So everything from disease surveillance to that immunization registry to customer-facing and education system-facing portals, files that they had to move around, batch files, and also building a data lake so that they could offer better support to the communities that they're working with. And every single one of them was solving for things like patient identity in a different way. And we were having a lot of trouble trying to resolve across all of those what a specific patient was, so that the state wasn't going to be reporting doses multiple times, or even being able to identify populations that needed an outreach. And so they were having troubles with that. And so we talked about that Enterprise Master Patient Index and creating that service across all of the different programs within the department, so that no matter where you were, you could always identify a patient uniquely. Or to the best ability that you could. And so exposing that as an API, and in this case, a RESTful API that each one of those different silos can interact with. So whether it's the orchestration layer for all of those at the integration and orchestration layer that's done in Rhapsody or in Envoy, or the individual systems within those different programs calling out to that EMPI. And it also introduced the notion of needing to have both an externally facing and internally facing gateway to make sure that only the appropriate people were able to call those surfaces, and that they were trackable and self-healing, so that you could see how that worked across the whole state.
You made that transition super easy for me, Damien. So when, as customers, like for example, that State Department of Health customer use case you were referencing, but as they ramp up use of APIs, meaning more traffic, more endpoints, what does Lineate do to support them? And when is an API gateway important?
Yeah, so really the API gateway is meant as that front door. And when you're exposing APIs, you have the actual systems that publish them, that create those endpoints, and then you have systems that want to be able to call those. And in between, if you want to have a single place to manage the authentication and access control, you can put a gateway in place. And that gateway tracks where those users are coming from, and it can also provide protection so that attacks don't come in and overload the system. So you can control the way in which those APIs are called from outside of your organization. And as I mentioned, within that State Department of Health, they were also using it for internal calls. So the various systems that were across the whole thing, they intend to go through that gateway, whether it's being called from from Salesforce or being called from one of the disease surveillance systems or e-case reporting. All of those would go through that gateway. And as you can see on the screen here, I won't go through all of the capabilities, but it really is meant to be that digital front door that allows people access to those, as well as you having the comfort around, can I expose this out to the public?
A little bit of peace of mind goes a long way. Awesome. All right, well, I'll pause now, take a look to see if there's any other questions we want to address. And then I can go into a little bit more about how we're meeting customers where they are in their API journey. All right, well, this is the perfect transition. We got a question about whether within this webinar, we're going to show how an API is built in Rhapsody. And while we won't go into that level of detail in today's webinar, we do have opportunities for our existing customers to learn about working with APIs in CorePoint and Rhapsody. Caitlin, do you want to offer anything up about what you know about our CorePoint Web Services or Rhapsody professional training?
Yeah, sure. Actually taking both. So I think that specific to that question, I'll just do one tidbit. We would start with an HTTP server communication point, but let's that's absolutely something we can discuss in a use case specific conversation. But we offer trainings to make sure our customers feel empowered in how to build the orchestrations that they need that require hosting APIs within the solution. And so both of the CorePoint and Rhapsody specific trainings are going to offer the basics of understanding what an XML and payload looks like. So even if this is something that's new to you, I wouldn't hesitate to take these types of trainings. And then we could also, of course, and then they also dive deeper into actually the setup, and they're both hands-on courses. One is the CorePoint course is instructor-led, while the Rhapsody course is a self-paced course with a quiz at the end that you work with someone from the education team to give you feedback. But I also always like to step that we also offer Firebase courses if that's something you're interested in, to kind of just understand where FHIR can fit into your workflows, or whether it's something that you're encountering now, or whether it's something you see your organization moving to in the future. And those are not product specific. And so everything from first steps and then a more in-depth overview.
Awesome, thank you, Caitlin. Got another question here asking if the Rapid API Gateway is also available on-prem or only in the cloud, with the context added that they have a lot of APIs that live within their environment and are consumed inside the environment. So while Rapid is a cloud deployed offering, a cloud native solution, it can still work to provide those same functions for APIs that are consumed within your environment. So it can do the same functions that we describe in this visual for external organizations. It can also do that for you internally. I'll pause if my technical experts here with me want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's enough. It works the same whether it's inside or outside.
Great. Okay. Well, we've been through the training that we offer, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the training opportunity we have for our existing customers at Connect 2022. So we are stoked to announce, quite frankly, that we have an in-person customer user group coming up in October. So beyond the chance to network in person and hear about our product roadmaps, it'll be an opportunity for existing customers to learn about working with APIs, learn about cloud migration, and the changing interoperability landscape. So registration will open up this month, and we look forward to seeing some of our current customers there. Thank you, everyone, for joining this discussion on APIs, all of our customers, and thank you, Damien and Caitlin, for your time. I hope you got something out of this, and if anything, that it at least just starts the conversation with Lineate and how we can meet you where you are with your API adoption journey. So reminder that we will be sending a recording of this session to anyone who registered to attend. So look forward to seeing that in your inbox. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks all.